Hello, grade 8s, and welcome to your second flipped classroom video of the year. Today we are going to be talking about the Black Death. I think you're really going to enjoy this topic, and we're going to talk about it more in class on Thursday. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how the Black Death affected England, because that's our topic for this week, and next week we're going to talk about Japan. There are four things that I would like you to take notes on today. First of all, I want you to take notes on what the plague is. I'm going to show you a slide with the definition. You can shorten that definition for your notes. Please go ahead and do that. I'm also going to talk about how the Black Death arrived in England, how it originally spread there. Again, you don't need to write down all of the bullet points. I would like you guys to work on your note-taking skills and figure out what is most important for your notes. Thirdly, I would like you to write down how people tried to prevent the Black Death from spreading. They didn't have a complete understanding of medicine at the time, so they tried different methods. Most were not successful. And lastly, I want you to take notes on what society was like after the plague. So remember, you can pause the video at any time. You can watch it once. The second time you can take your notes. It's all up to you. You can go at your own pace. One thing before we move on to our title and learning objective is I will talk about the symptoms for the plague. You do not need to write those in your notes because we're going to focus more on that in class on Thursday. Okay, so don't worry about taking notes on that part. Okay, here we go. Here's your title, The Black Death. We are going to, our learning objectives for this lesson, we are going to identify what the Black Death was. And we're going to examine the causes and the impact that the Black Death had on England and society. Okay, so please remember to underline your title, write today's date, and your two learning objectives. All right, moving on. What was the Black Death? People who caught the disease had swellings on their bodies, sometimes as big as eggs. So imagine if you lifted up your arm and in your armpit you had like an egg in your skin. That's exactly what it was like. Then black spots would appear all over you, which is how the Black Death got its name. Here's a quote. Emergence of certain tumors in the groin or armpit, some of which grew as large as a common apple. Black spots appeared on the arm or the thigh. Ooh. All right, the Black Death killed nearly 2.5 million people in Britain between 1347 and 1350. So for 3 years, the Black Death was spreading all over England and Scotland and Wales. All right, take this time to write down 3 things you would like to know about the Black Death. This can be bullet points, and if you don't learn about these in today's PowerPoint, then we can talk about it in class. The spread of the plague. So I'm going to give you 2 definitions or 2 types of the plague, and I would like you to make sure you have these for your notes. Okay, the first is the bubonic plague. It was the most common, and that worked by fleas who carried the disease, and the fleas, here we have one, would bite rats and infect those. Those rats would then be infected and fleas would bite them, and they would bite other rats or humans, okay? And that is how humans got it. But at the time, you would have lots of rats running around more urban areas, and that is how the disease spread rapidly. And they had no idea that fleas were carrying this disease. They had no idea that rats were carrying this disease. That people just did not understand. So they weren't looking to kill fleas or rats, so it was able to spread easily. The second type of plague was the pneumonic plague. That's a silent P, pneumonic. This was less common but more deadly. And again, people did not understand it at the time because it was caught by breathing in the germs released when an infected person, so someone who had the plague, when they coughed or sneezed. Today, that's how common colds are spread, and we understand that. But at the time, people did not get that you could spread germs that way. All right, here are some symptoms of the Black Death, and we'll come back to that. All right, day one. You would have swellings. We've already talked about this. Swellings that would be the size of an egg or an apple that could appear in your armpits, your groin, or your neck. And these swellings were called buboes, which you can understand where that came from. The root word is in bubonic plague, buboes. All right, day two. So morning of day one, you would feel these lumps. Day two, you would be throwing up and you would be burning up with a fever. So we can see our poor gentleman over here is very sick. All right, day three, you would have bleeding under the skin. And that's exactly what a bruise is that you have these broken blood vessels. But this looked much worse than bruises, so they were pretty gross. And you would have that all over your body, and they would eventually turn black, which is where you get the Black Death. All right, day four, you would have severe spasms. Your muscles would crunch up, and then they would want to straighten out. So your legs would be convulsing, your arms, you might be keeling over 1 minute and standing up straight in the next, and you had no control over this. So you can tell that it would be really painful for that to happen. All right, and day five. If a person survives for 5 days, then the buboes burst. So those are your big egg things in your armpit. And then you would have black fluid that would ooze out. And you might survive, but chances are you won't. All right, and those are your symptoms if you have the Black Plague. All right, so remember you can take your own notes on this. So how did the plague actually arrive in England and in Britain? Well, the Black Death traveled along trading routes, so people are spreading it around. And you would have rats on board. So the rats would spread the bubonic plague and people would spread the pneumonic plague. So merchant ships had rats on board. Remember, merchants are people who sell items, so they're trading things and they're traveling around all over Europe and the Mediterranean. The rats got on the boats in China and India, where it is thought, people are guessing, that is where the disease began. And the disease transferred onto the sailors on board. So when those ships got back home, the disease infected people working at the docks. When they went home, they would spread it. When they would go into town, they would spread it. And so it caught on very quickly, as you can imagine. So how did people try to stop it from happening? At the time, it was chaos. People were so scared. They didn't want to hide in their houses, but they tried many different tactics to try to prevent catching this disease. So one of the methods was that they thought that by bleeding people, they could get rid of the bad blood which caused the plague. And that's exactly what it sounded like. All right. Flagellants were people who believed that if they whipped and hurt themselves, God would take pity on them. So yes, they would purposely hurt themselves. They would take a whip and strike their body, and they would hope that God would see them doing that and try to help them out. So that method also tells you something about what people in medieval England thought about medicine and what they thought about religion. because today we know that whipping yourself wouldn't do anything other than cause yourself harm, but people at the time did not believe that. All right, we have a third method here, which is actually a primary source. So we have someone who says, toad should be placed on the plague boil. The toad will swell and draw out the poison of the plague to its own body. So that was another belief they held at the time. There's a question at the bottom of the screen I want you to reflect on right now. Do you think that any of these methods would work? So maybe the bleeding or the toads. All right, and here are a few more examples of other methods used at the time. So people tried all sorts of things. One source says, carry sweet-smelling herbs with you. Maybe that will ward off the disease. Or tie a shaved chicken or a dried frog to your buboes. We've heard this one, pray and whip yourself to show God that you are sorry for your sin. Or the last one, I'm interested to know what you guys think of this one. Soften your buboes with butter, then cut them open. Okay, and here's our last slide of the day, which is our last topic. What happened to those people who lived? So here's a shocking statistic. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population in England died due to the plague. So that's pretty sad. So lots of people lost their loved ones. Entire families died out. Entire villages died out. But in some ways, for the people who survived, life actually improved. That's shocking to believe. But because there were fewer people, there was more food to go around. So prices fell. It was a lot cheaper to buy food, so you're not going to starve, especially if you're someone like a peasant who doesn't have much money. Secondly, landlords had to pay more to attract laborers to work for them. So people, skilled laborers, unskilled laborers, landlords are trying to get them to come work for them. They're going to pay more money because there's less people to fill those jobs. That's a benefit. Lastly, many peasants felt freer and were better off than ever before. So actually, some people benefited from the Black Plague. All right, make sure you get some of this in your notes, and we'll talk more about the Black Plague in class on Thursday. See you then.